Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this webinar where we are going to explore really some foundational practical steps related to networks that transportation leaders really should consider when they are looking to evolve to that next generation or sophistication in their intelligent transportation systems. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Daniele Lofreda from Ciena. Joining me today are Bob Pfeiffer from the Colorado Department of Transportation and John Barton of HNTB, but formerly of the Texas Department of Transportation. Welcome, gentlemen, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So to begin with, I'd like to ask each of you to just take a couple of minutes and let the audience know what you do and what types of ITS or automated highway or other technology-related initiatives you've been working on. Bob, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks for the opportunity today to brag about my great state of Colorado. So I'm the branch manager and superintendent of the Colorado Department of Transportation's ITS and Network Services branch. We're responsible for all the fiber optics, all of the networking, all of the ITS equipment deployed, and really basically any technology deployed on our interstates and highways. So my team really focuses on the engineering, the standards, the specs, the programmatic support like asset management, all the way to field operations and maintenance of the technology, as well as we're one of the few DOTs that have an actual operations center, network operations center that's monitoring the availability of our equipment and devices. So team's very broad and diverse, and we've been spending a lot of time focusing on how we can make sure the technology within our DOT is accessible, reliable, and available for the user base, as well as our traveling public. And that the more we become reliant on technology, the more importance of it to be invisible. And if you think about invisibility, if you did not have your phone for a day or it didn't work for a day, I'm sure you would be panicking. So that's where we've become so reliant on some tool like technology that it's actually invisible. You don't realize you have it in your hands until you're missing it or lose it or it's broken. So that's a little spill from us.
That's a good point. I like the way you said that. You know, the goal is to make technology invisible, right? And at the same time, our leadership doesn't really notice it until it's not there, right?
Yep.
That's a good. That's a fine line that you straddle. Hey, John, how about you?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this webinar with all of you. As Danielle mentioned earlier, I am formerly with Texas Department of Transportation, retired there after 30 years as the Deputy Executive Director and Chief Engineer, and I've been with HNTB now for 4 years, and the chairman of our professional services. That's our National Transportation Executive that really supports our support of clients across the firm related to aviation, transit, toll authorities, and of course, state DOTs. And as we think about the services that we provide to Bob and others like him at the state DOTs, it's really to help enable the implementation and utilization of technologies to do all the great things they do for emerging mobility solutions and for transportation technologies. A lot of those have to do with traffic management centers and all the traditional ITS implementation and infrastructure, but now it's starting to, branch out into the use of broadband and how we deploy that across states and communities and counties to provide that digital connection to reduce the digital gaps that are in our communities, making sure that we're taking advantage of these emerging transportation solutions like automated and self-driving vehicles, connected vehicles, ride sharing, bike sharing, and other mobility solutions, and to do that in a way that's integrated with technologies so that at the end of the day, as Bob mentioned, we all want to be able to grab our smart device and be able to get to where we want to be from where we are with that kind of a smart device and connection. And we're just grateful for the opportunity to be a part of helping enable those technologies for our clients across the country.
Great, John. And you mentioned some self-driving cars, V2X, et cetera. We're going to talk about that later. Before we jump in, I just want to say Ciena, we manufacture the hardware and create the software that really powers those fiber networks that are fundamental to and ITS. And as Bob said, technology is kind of invisible, and even network technology is even more invisible. So we're kind of behind the scenes. So let's get into some of the key discussion topics. We hear about in the news all this kind of real sexy stuff like self-driving vehicles, remote speed enforcement, vehicle-to-vehicle communications, drone delivery, et cetera. And those really make the headlines. But in your experience, are we really ready for those in prime time, or is that more experimental? Do we have the right infrastructure in place to make sure that they can operate on a day-to-day basis without a hitch? Or do you feel that we're maybe jumping the gun a bit? I'll throw that open to either one of you to respond, and then the other can jump in.
I'll dive in first, and then John can weigh in. I have mixed emotions around this because some of the sexy things you want to work on, you're kind of listing a few of those sexy things in the technology world. I struggle personally around that because we first have to look at fundamental or foundational things that we have to address. Good example is ensuring that we have a network that can support the communications. We have the ability to communicate with technology. We have resiliency and business continuity plans in place. We have created an environment and an infrastructure behind those sexy items to ensure that they're always available. Because the minute, there's mixed emotion around drone delivery, and I probably shouldn't mix into this one, but at the end of the day, when you do, when somebody gets used to having something every day, like I was saying earlier about, technology being invisible, if it's not able to communicate and it's not able to continue to be available, then what good is it, right? So, structurally, I always look at first, if you want to do those things, you've got to look at, do you have the fiber? Do you have the redundancy? Do you have the right network system? Do you have the right technology in place? Do you have cloud computing that's needed for the ability to transact with this technology? All those fundamental things have to be there first before you can get there. We at CDOT, we pride ourselves. We do lean forward in this topic. We've on occasion have probably leaned beyond our ski tips. I think that's a good analogy for the state of Colorado. And you can fail very easily. Technology can get you so excited over something that's blingy and excitable, but if you don't have the fundamental ability to maintain it, own it, roadmap it, evolve it, then it's not worth having. It becomes something that's expensive and is put in the drawer, and we just need to make sure everyone understands those fundamental aspects.
Yeah. I remember talking to you a couple of years ago at Mountain Connect, Bob. You were talking about some of the applications you were looking at in addition to the automatic payment system on the tollways. But you're also looking at applications for the automated weigh stations where trucks don't have to pull over and be weighed. They can just automatically with a sensor go through it, and then that saves so much time. But that by the same token, the technology and the network has to be there to make sure that it works, and that the state is getting the revenue that is coming to it. So any thoughts? I know that was something we talked about a couple of years ago. How have you guys done on that?
Well, obviously we're always focusing on efficient commerce through our state. We want to be focused on the ease of travel, reduce travel times, congestion. We're always excited around that, and technology can be leveraged to do that. Again, a good recent example, we have a beautiful canyon in our state. I-70 goes through Glenwood Canyon, and we had a major mudslide rockfall in a burn scar area that has wiped out an elevated highway or interstate. And now we've got it restored within 2 weeks, at least temporarily, but it also grabbed all my fiber and yanked it right out of the ground in the middle median. But when that happens, then those efficiencies we've gained go away because I didn't have a diverse route to get those communications back online. Now, granted, we did within 5 days, we had a partner step up and provide us bandwidth to give us diversity. But if you don't have those partnerships in place, then those efficiencies you're looking for, where technology has gained those efficiencies, is now not there, and you do lose out revenue. You do impact commerce. You do impact commercial vehicle travel. You impact the traveling public. And again, that technology is not invisible now. It's now visibly having a problem, and you lose everything that you were trying to gain.
John, how about you? Do you feel we got the infrastructure in place for, even the basics, let alone the advanced, or how far are we?
Yeah, I think that's a great point that, a lot of these technologies and solutions are very attractive. I think the public and certainly our transportation professionals largely understand the opportunity and the promise that they present, but the fundamental basics of enabling these in a reliable, sustainable, and resilient way are things that we have to take time to invest in properly. And it's not just the physical things, it's the policies about how we will go from one jurisdiction to another, how we'll have these interfaces between the public and the private domain. A lot of private innovators are wanting to move quickly. They need to be first to market. There's a lot of pressure there, but on the public side, there's a responsibility to the traveling public, to the citizens as a whole, to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to play, and that when they do consume those services, that they can rely on them. So I think there are many important foundational elements that need to be put in place. We all need to understand that. The good news is that the opportunity to do that perhaps is greater today than it ever has been, or at least will be when this infrastructure bill is passed on September the 27th and then replace the FAST Act with more money and with money directly targeted at these types of infrastructures. The analogy I would give, and I appreciate Bob's getting over your tips of your skis a bit for Colorado, is in a transportation arena, we've understood what the pavement might be able to do. We understand the materials to build a rigid pavement or a flexible pavement, but we really haven't understand the soils underneath it. Maybe we haven't done the right geotechnical exploration and really prepared that subgrade to receive the pavement. So all these sexy solutions are what's on the surface, and we got to make sure that we have the foundation below it so that that will perform well and that it will provide those services that all of us are eager to consume from these types of technologies.
John, I want to follow up on a comment that you made earlier about not just focused on the foundational elements for the ITS and the transportation related applications, but more importantly, the broadband that is going to help close the digital divide and make sure that all the constituents across a state and municipality have that equal access to broadband, which will in turn help with their access to the transportation applications. Where do you think we are in all that?
It's interesting. I think that there's a universal understanding of the opportunity and the promise of providing more infrastructure to close the digital divide. But I don't think any of us have really fully understood the financial implications of what we're talking about and how the private and the public sectors can work together to enable this, nor that we've looked at I'm sure, plethora of local and state statutory and ordinance controls on these types of things. So in some jurisdictions, maybe the implementation of that in a public right of way is easily accomplished. In another jurisdiction next to it, they may charge franchise fees for the installation of all these kinds of solutions. And then how do you ensure that you have common carriers that can provide those services to a variety of customers in a variety of geographies? So there's a lot of policy and legal issues to work through, and I think we can work through them quickly, but it will take time and energy. And as Bob is here today, while he is a great partner, certainly to his colleagues and other state DOTs, I think he would be the first to say that the approach and the statutory control and authority he has in Colorado is different than the approach and statutory control in New Mexico or Kansas or Nebraska or Utah or Nevada or any of those neighboring states.
Yeah. Well, let's take that. And Bob, this is to you. I know over the last several years, you've been really active in going across Colorado to the mountain towns and really proposing some collaboration between them and CDOT in trying to use everyone's fiber assets to build out these statewide rings. And I remember you mentioning the other day something about trying to expand that notion into other nearby states. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you're doing?
Yeah, actually, it's quite a bit. So I want to, before I elaborate on that, can I just tag on to John real quick, because I think John is sparking a conversation that I'd like to elaborate a little bit more. When you talk about, and I'll get to your question, Danielle, if I might have to have you re-ask it, but I want to talk about a digital divide because it's an interesting conversation for a DOT to be in the middle of a digital divide. I come from 27 years in the telecom industry, and I I negotiated my pay cut to be a state worker, and well, actually my wife did, not me. And I love it. I love being here, but I also like having the experience and the background to have these discussions. But when you talk about digital divide, there's emotions around it, and I like to use the word emotions because it depends if you're on the private or the public side. They'll vary. But let's just simplify it a little bit more around digital divide. Where the DOT, I feel, sits in that is we are an infrastructure builder. That's what we do. We do that good. Asphalt, curb, gutter, sidewalks, trails even. We do, here in Colorado, we do avalanche control and mitigation. We do rock slide mitigation, geohazard issues. So we're one of those that have a variety of infrastructure activities. But let's talk about fiber. Fiber could be classified as infrastructure. I feel that the DOT has a good play, and every state's a little bit different, like John's pointed out. But in our state, we should have a conversation around, should the DOTs be an infrastructure builder as if we're building fiber? And let me give you a good example. In our state, we collect taxes and fees off of license plates to pay for our infrastructure, right? Well, UPS, DHL, FedEx, Amazon, whoever you want to use, they use your roads, they have license plates to get to deliver their products or the product. Well, why don't we change that conversation and say, well, how if we put fiber in the ground? It's infrastructure. It's a different type of information highway possibly, and that people pay a fee to provide their products. That could be ISPs, internet providers, it could be telecommunication providers, it could be whatever. But at the end of the day, should we look at a dig once and put fiber in the ground that people can use to deliver their products as much as our roads deliver products? That would be an interesting discussion to bring into the digital divide. Because if you remove the barrier of entry, which is usually you're trenching and you're using the or boring using the right of way, the DOT gains a little bit more control of what's happening underneath the infrastructure, because that's sometimes a problem as well for all of us, is the mess that's underneath. But also what it does is it removes the barrier of entry for private sector to access their end users and provide a product. That in return, in my opinion, would reduce the costs, increase the availability, and encourage competition. When I worked on the FCC's Intergovernment Advisory Committee, when I was appointed under Chairman Wheeler, one of the things that I learned in that committee, I was there for several years as I was appointed, was the best form of regulation sometimes is competition. And if we allow, open access to the fiber, then now you should see rates go down, availability go up, speeds go up, and we achieve possibly a digital divide shrinkage. And that's where I think the DOT can have a seat at that table and have that conversation. So I'll get off that soapbox, but I wanted to jump on that because I think that's a national conversation that we need to have, and all the DOTs need to be kind of aligned in that. And we need the industry to support this conversation, because maybe they should look at product delivery versus, including lighting it, but actually avoid building the true infrastructure. So I'll get off there.
And just let me put that really gives another sort of dimension to the term mobility as a service, right?
Yes. Absolutely, it does. It does. So I believe your next question was around kind of looking at the resiliency plan and the bigger picture of how we work with communities in other states. So recently, and I'm very proud of this conversation, we called it a fiber summit between New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado DOTs around fiber. Just in general, what is fiber? What does that mean to our states? How do we help each other out? And we're having some really interesting conversations around resiliency and the fiber between our states. Like, how would if Colorado has, unfortunately, a catastrophe and I can't operate my highway safely? Could I roll my operations to Utah or Arizona or to another state and say, we're having catastrophe, our operation centers are down, and is there any way you can help us? Well, how do you do that? So some of the discussions have been maybe we should link our fiber together at the state lines and start sharing network, wavelengths in this case, possibly between us to create a resiliency ring between the states and back to Colorado. So if I have a Glenwood Canyon issue again and my fiber is ripped out of the canyon, I could have failed through New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and came all the way back around, and my services would have still been up and resilient and available. We don't have that because in our state, we're square and we're creating this cross a lot of lines, hub and spoke, it's hard to make a circle. So when you're talking about, redundancy, you've got to start there. So we're having those discussions, and those are very good conversations to have. And, we as a region are trying to take that on our own. It's all organic, grassroots conversation. And that's where now I feel you are now creating a resilient DOT system as well. And we've done this, and let me kind of talk about Glenwood again. The partner that helped us get our services back was a council of governments who was leasing our fiber to create resiliency for all the towns and communities and counties in the area, happened to have a backup to the fiber that was torn out that they were leasing from us, and got us bandwidth and got us back up in less than 5 days after the disaster. And we got our cameras and our weather stations up, and we were having more flash floods. So it was very important for our weather stations to be up. That partnership is what saved our bacon to get to see beyond the canyon, so we can see the other side where the catastrophe was happening. So, that's why it's important to have those relationships, and you never know when you need each other. And I'm glad that those partnerships are there, and we have them with the private side as well. And having those relationships have improved our resiliency tenfold here in the state.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that collaboration with council of governments, because we're seeing a lot more of that play out. John, let me toss it to you, and talk about collaboration, between jurisdiction within a state and on a regional basis outside the state.
I think Bob really highlighted the reason why it's so important, and it's as we face a changing climate, and I think there's universal acceptance that is happening. The Glenwood Springs or Glenwood Canyon tragedy that Bob's talking about is a climate-related matter. It was a burn scar that then had a torrential rainfall on it, and clearly climate-related. But that resiliency is so critical, and that collaboration between local, state, and I would even say national resources, both within the public and private sector, are critical for this infrastructure that we're talking about to be available, to be resilient, and to be protected against the security issues that likely will arise. And it's not just creating rings within regions. It's really a local, I think of it like an energy distribution system. And living in Texas, we all know what happened this winter. It made international news, but the challenge there was that it was an independent system. It was ERCOT within Texas, not connected to the national grid. And when it started to cascade, there was no place to draw power from other than itself. So in IT technology, there was no ring, there was no resiliency. Within this space for these technologies, and they're critical, they can't be lost, is to have that local network ring capacity, like Bob just mentioned, with partnerships between councils of government, cities, local healthcare communities, education communities that are providing these services to their schools or their hospitals or their local public transit agencies and that sort of thing. And then a state-to-state network where there's resiliency across borders, so that you can take a traffic management center operations and move it from Denver, Colorado to Salt Lake City if you need to. There is a lot of conversations around those things happening. What we have the responsibility and the opportunity to do is really enable that with thought leadership and with policy proposals, because again, unfortunately, all these great ideas from a technology perspective are possible, but from a jurisdictional political perspective, they sometimes get a little complicated. And the private sector's involvement, to me, and the conversations we're having with clients, all public agencies all across this country, they understand that companies like Alphabet and others are critical to be a part of the solution, and we have to be open to the fact that none of us have a self-sustained public communication system for our wireless devices. We depend on the private sector for that. We can make that happen here. We just have to work through those program and policy questions.
It's interesting you mentioned because the private sector, because you've got on the one hand the connectivity, right, and sharing amongst jurisdictions and regions, but the reason for that is to make sure that all of your employees, your clients, your constituents have access to the applications, right? And some of those applications are very latency sensitive and bandwidth intensive. So then that now takes us into kind of a discussion of, where does sort of like multi-cloud and edge compute play into a DOT's thinking. Bob, maybe I hand it to you because I know you had some good thoughts around that the other day.
Yeah, I always like to start with a use case because you're always wondering why, and in this particular thing, not that we've solved this yet, but I can at least tell you what we're trying to do is there's about 2,700 avalanche paths or avalanches that take place within our state every year. There's like 32 to 3,600 avalanches in our state, of which about 24 to 2,700 of those are within the DOT's jurisdiction and have to either mitigate or clean up, at the end of the day. The ability to detect an avalanche or mudslide in this case, detect and then communicate to the traveling public to keep people safe and aware, to make those good decisions, to maybe lower speeds and notify, we have about 40 seconds to inform our public. When you start looking at, latency sensitive transactions, this would be a good one, right? So what we're trying to do is detect, change our message boards to say avalanche ahead, and lower our speed limits on our variable speed limit signs, which we have in this whole corridor, to 35 or 45, just to slow everyone down before they get to the area of which the avalanche is taking place. For us to prepare for that, yes, we were excited, we want to do it, we know what the outcome needs to be, and we know why. The problem still goes back to what I said earlier, is foundationally, we may not be, once we relied on to make sure that action takes place, fundamentally or foundationally, I have to have the infrastructure to do it. In this case, we are working with a cloud provider to create the policies and the decision making, but we're pushing it out onto the edge. So we're actually now starting to deploy edge computing and machine learning, little tiny servers onto our edge that will learn the policy from our cloud compute, understand what the conditions are, and then keep it localized. So if our detectors say this is happening, locally it will turn around, speed limits are instantaneously, and the message boards are changed, if not stopped, because we want to start changing those to full color matrix. We might actually put up stop signs just to keep people from going further than we need to. That is a case where you need to start thinking of, well, what does cloud computing do for you? What does machine learning do for you? What does artificial intelligence do for you? And what are you trying to achieve? If you don't know why, then don't do it, because you're just going to spend all day long spending money on technology. You need to have a very clear performance target and a very clear outcome in a desired state, and have the asset management and lifecycle management behind that. If you have not identified those, don't attempt this until you do, because it's a thing that once it's there, it's always going to be expected. And again, it goes all the way to the very beginning when I said, when technology is invisible, that's the best day of my life right now, is as long as my stuff stays invisible. But the minute it goes down, going back, I hate to start using Glenwood Canyon still, but not only did we lose our cameras and our weather stations, but our trunk radios, our all of our our first responder radio system was at risk. All of our tunnel operations in the tunnels that were at risk. There was so much more at risk then you started scratching your head and saying, oh, wow, boy, Bob, what are you doing to solve this? This should never happen again. And so, you really need to make sure you have a game plan behind and a desired outcome. And I'll go back, business continuity is huge. I know that's a new buzzword for DOTs, but business continuity, if this happens, what are you going to do? If this happens, what are you going to do? If you have a COVID, outbreak in there, what are you going to do? How do you have remote workers? How do you have a remote workforce? How do you still operate the highway, but yet out of somebody's, office at home? Those are all questions you have to figure out when you go through that. So it was a long answer around latency, cloud compute, but all that ties together in my eyes.
Yeah, no, it's really good, and it brings out the question of security, right? Because we've got more edge compute, and we've got VPNs out trying to connect our workers from home. Even though what was it, the latest VPN risk report saying something like 94% of organizations are deploying VPNs, even though 95% of them know that they're introducing a cyber vulnerability. So it's this kind of performance versus security that we're dealing with. John, how about from your perspective, edge compute, multi-cloud, how does that play into a DOT's thinking?
Yeah, I think Bob hit on all the highlights that I would. And I guess I would start by reinforcing a couple of things. Don't do it just for the sake of doing it, right? You really need to know the why around why you would want to utilize these technology solutions. And I think for those hyper local decision-making processes, cloud computing makes all the sense in the world. We've also talked a lot in the industry and DOTs are thinking about data aggregation and the importance of allowing edge computing to help with all of those things to make those decisions. So that's really, really important. And again, for the resiliency, business continuity, it's critical. And, we'll continue to take advantage of the crisis of the Glenwood Canyons example. But, for those of you that know Colorado, as you go across the Continental Divide, can you imagine what would have happened had the fiber connectivity that connected the medical center of Colorado and Denver from Aspen, and someone was there in that local hospital needing life critical information through the connectivity the internet provides, and they didn't have it? I mean, it's just impossible to think about. And not that we need to sensationalize or be overly dramatic about the importance of these systems that we're talking about for transportation services, but it is a life safety issue, and we need to be thinking about that. And DOTs are starting to wrap their minds around the fact that as they start to develop these technologies and to deploy them, there has to be that level of resiliency or business continuity built into their planning process. Some of that's physical infrastructure, some of it's policy and planning approaches. All state DOTs, a lot of us don't remember this, but when we had H1N1, the flu virus back in the early part of the 2000s, we had pandemic plans. All of us had to develop pandemic plans, and we remember schools were shutting down because there were too many people with the flu. We didn't have the mortality rate that we have under the coronavirus. But it's interesting, when we were hit with this pandemic, a lot of us had forgotten that we had those pandemic plans, and what do we do and how do we implement them? And of course, we went to something different overnight, and grateful for technology to allow us to do that very, very well and to have some business continuity. But it kind of leads into the broader security question as well, Daniela, and that is that it's not a matter of, are you going to have an information security challenge? You are 100% guarantee. Every DOT is going to face an InfoSec threat. It happens every day. They're going to be a victim to it. What's really important is, how do you plan for that, and how do you respond to that when it happens? And do you have that business continuity plan in place? Do you have these multi-cloud solutions in place? What is the why behind all of this? And it's part, to me, the real question is, there are very legitimate whys. But, as DOTs and as other public authorities, we really need to think through those and understand what it is we're trying to accomplish, so that when we purchase those solutions, when we implement them, we're accomplishing that why. But otherwise, it's just we talked about it early on, it's a sexy solution that we all want to say we have, but if we're not really utilizing it for the value it brings, then it doesn't serve the purpose for which those precious public resources were committed. So we want to make sure that we're doing it and doing it right.
Yeah, and if I may, because you brought up a good point, and this is for both of you, can we realistically expect now that we can prevent cyber hacks, or is this more a how quickly can we detect and recover? I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think that's a new era for DOTs, right? Because it's not very often that, even probably not at all, for DOTs to hire cybersecurity experts, assuming we have the budgets to do that. I mean, that's one issue, right? But it is an area that DOTs have to be focusing on, is what are the enterprise grade cybersecurity, systems, protocols, software that has to be, embedded into protecting the transportation system itself, right? I mean, that's something new that when you're proposing budgets, you got to start thinking about, this is a must-have. I want to also add in here that, as much as we talk about business continuity plans, kind of think of it this way: as a DOT, we have TIMS plans, right? Traffic incident management plans. A business continuity plan in this world is a TIM plan in a way. And how important those TIM plans are is why you need business continuity. And I just wanted to kind of relate that to the DOTs. The other thing I want to also add real quick, going back to John's comments, is a lot of the technology, when we go into edge computing and so forth, we've got to look at the ITS architecture. Those are all, regulated or they're mandated on us to have those, and at least have them to our states, right? Our states should have some regionally recognized ITS, depends how your state's divided up and so forth, ITS architecture that will keep you aligned in your strategies moving forward around technology and making sure that those service packages that the ITS architecture that the FHWA tells us to use provides us on the why and what are we trying to do. So I want to make sure we wrap around that conversation that technology and our FHWA, required documents are followed as well. And those will guide you through this conversation that's more transportation related around technology. So sorry, I wanted to answer John's questions on those things too, or statements. I think that there's some good relationship there.
Yeah, and Danielle, I think that to your question around information security threats, I think that it is two-dimensional. I think there's a lot of preservation or prevention activities that should be taken, correcting my term there, to prevent the hack from occurring in the first place. There are things that we need to train our employees on, making sure that they're not a victim of phishing and those sorts of things, and that we have security systems in place to detect the pings that are coming into our networks and protecting us from people that are out there trying to get into them, hack into them. And so there's a lot of value in investing in prevention. But it's much like this current pandemic we're facing. We all are taking preventative measures, and we hope that we never are subjected to being infected. But even with the best of prevention activities taking place, people have continued to be infected. So I think information security is the same way. There are people that are staying in their parents' basements all day and all night, just hacking away at this. We laugh about that. There are forces of evil all across this globe that are wanting to hurt others all across this globe, and they're working hard to do it. And some of them think that they're going to be, become extremely wealthy by ransomware attacks and other things. So I guess it's prevention to the extreme, but also understanding that you will likely at some point be a victim of this. And then it's a matter of mitigation and response. How do you overcome it? What are your resilience plans, business continuity plans, whatever term you want to use, and how can you quickly, like Colorado has had to face, Texas has had to face, other state DOTs have had to face, how do you quickly recover from that and get back to the business that the public is expecting us all to carry out?
Yeah. So now we've heard a lot about the new workloads being put on the network. We talked about security at the network level. We talked about edge compute and multi-cloud and advanced ITS applications. In your minds, I mean, what does that mean from a legacy network perspective? And what role does sort of like moving towards a more automated software-defined network versus like the static sort of device-centric networks? Interested to hear how your thinking is evolving around networking.
Well, I will say when I came to CDOT, it was actually pretty impressive that they had a carrier grade network being built. And, you got to lean forward. One of the things that when you're thinking about networking as a whole, like you said, static versus software defined, I mean, I have mixed emotions around the software defined right now because every DOT is going to be unique in their needs and demands and automation. And some of the defined networks don't align necessarily with DOT missions. So some of that can be done internally or a contractor coming in or consultant coming in and doing some of that programming. So, at the end of the day, I find in our world, we have a very strong vision, and you got to have that vision. And you also have to be aware that the minute I'm deploying a network now, I'm already planning on what the replacement is going to be. Yeah. Because unfortunately, the network itself, typical useful life is about 7-8 years. I mean, I'll say honestly, you probably get 10 plus, but in our world, we probably will push the 10 plus if we can, just because of limited dollars. But at the end of the day, technically, most equipment needs to be refreshed and life cycled out within 7 years. So you already, have to plan, what does that look like? And what is the next evolution? And what is the desired outcome to make sure you have a roadmap that the convergence happens. Technology is converging at a very, this is what interests me with CDOT. It converges in a very unique, multidimensional level for me. You have a typical civil engineering organization that is great at building roads and bridges and doing wonderful things in that. But now you have convergence with technology mixing into that, fiber optics technology. you have connected autonomous vehicles, you're starting to have convergence of telecom, IT, and civil engineering come into one organization. And that is a change that needs to be embraced and understood. Cautiously, because we all keep talking about don't do technology for technology's sake, but you got to have a plan. So when you're talking about the refresh, or you're looking at your equipment and you're looking at software-defined networks, understand that one, you may not get what you need or your desired outcomes in a quick, 1 or 2 years, but you have that roadmap. And how does that roadmap align with your life cycle management of your network and your goals?
Yeah, and I would just add that as we've talked to DOTs around the country, what is clear is that not all DOTs are created equally, and not all chief technology or chief information officers within those DOTs and their teams have the same level of sophistication, understanding, and experience, and nor budgetary control. So I don't know that there is a one size fits all solution. I think the things to keep in mind are that these technologies are evolving rapidly, and to understand the in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, the historic procurement cycles that lie within state DOTs were based on the purchase of an asset and the ownership of that asset. And a lot of these solutions in terms of network are changing so rapidly that, as Bob mentioned, 7 years, and it's really probably beyond its life cycle. It maybe could eke a few more years out, but you need to be changing this quickly. Unfortunately, the ability for that technology to continue to function, whether it's at high level or not, exceeds beyond that. So a lot of procurement, programs and laws in place would have you sustain those. And I'll give one example to punctuate my belief that we should be thinking more about having network as a service that you consume rather than a product that you own. There was a state that went to all electronic bidding for its highway program. And so all bids had to be submitted electronically. And lo and behold, the threat that at some point the system would fail did happen. And when they did the interrogation of it, they found out that one of their servers had gone down within their network that allowed them to receive bids. There was one that the DOT owned itself, that they had purchased and implemented on itself. And the manufacturer of that server system literally had to pull blades out of their museum to install to fix it because it was that old. So that's just a real example that sheds some light on the fact that these solutions are so critical to our essential functions and are evolving so rapidly that I think all of us need to be thoughtful about the consumption of these as a service rather than ownership of a product to the extent that we can. But again, it's not a one size fits all. There's no panacea solution for every challenge that every DOT or other public authority faces there.
And Nelly, can I jump in here?
Sure, please.
John provoked so many discussion points that I think him and I could just have a cup of coffee and keep on going. But you bring up some good points that I wanted to just chime in on. One is around making sure that you have a very clear, what are you trying to solve around asset management at the end of the day? And I know I highlight this many times, but let me give you an example. Like when you're describing as a DOT around technology, and how do you get leadership who's not familiar with technology? How do they get it to relate? And I will tell you two things that I'm trying to do here at CDOT that help connect the dots between, no pun intended, but between technology and the typical civil engineering organization. One is really having a clear approved product list, standards and specs that drive an APL, that drive a 5-pi for those that are all deep daughters out there, to really narrow down a manufacturer and really get into an APL list so you can gain those synergies so that you don't have to have so many technologists trying to figure out all these nuances you're bringing up because they're all valid. Like, give you an example, there was a camera that we thought would be fine, and come to find out they did not have security on the camera. They didn't develop anything that had security on it. And so, but a typical person who's not looking for cyber threats or security or functionality may forget to look at those critical items. So now you plugged it into that secured network, and now you might have created a vulnerability you didn't know. And it's not like every DOT is just filled with folks that are either, I don't want to say IT, that's not where we're going. These are people that understand transportation and technology, that understand that perspective. So I just wanted to kind of wrap it around of what we're trying to do to solidify standardization around some of the comments that you made, because the problem we've had at our DOT is a lot of folks will just go in and just buy whatever they saw was off the shelf. And then next thing you know, I have 15 different variations of cameras that now I have to maintain, operate, and try to integrate in. And one of those are now a security threat, right? Even traffic signal controllers have done that to us as well. So, really try to embrace the fact that you wrap in your federal requirements, you wrap in your APLs, your procurement process, but make sure you really try to put some guardrails around, man, I got a lot of DOT acronyms and things, but put some guardrails around what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to make sure is secure and safe at the end of the day. So you got me going down a rabbit hole, and I just saw our time, so I just need to make sure we give some audience time. And there was a question in there that's now gone. I don't know if it was answered, but Daniela, I just want to make sure we come back to it, but it was around MPO's role in enhancing broadband access and service.
Yeah. And actually, now's a good time to get into audience questions. So if you want to take that, how can MPOs have a role in enhancing broadband access and service?
Yeah, at least I'll chime in from my experience. The MPOs, yes, there could be scope creep. It depends on what the MPO's intent is or mission, because some MPOs are a little bit different than others. In our state, our COG, our MPO, and two of our areas do have a broadband arm. That was up to their elected officials that are on their board to decide, that that was important to their community to band together and create synergies. Because in some of these scenarios where MPOs have had a play, you have to look at it more as a convener of municipalities and counties and other special districts that band together to create fiber networks or networks as a whole, and see if those MPOs are wanting to do that. You're going all the way back to what John was saying earlier. There's laws and policies and all sorts of rules around that, and every state has different rules around it. But that's how an MPO can play a role. It's a convener. At the end of the day, yes, it's around, it's a metropolitan planning area or organization, but that it usually has a transportation spin into the MPO. And like I said earlier, fiber could be infrastructure just as much as a road, and an MPO has a play in it. So those are just my thoughts around it.
John, you have any thoughts around MPOs? And
yeah, just to add a little bit more to Bob's answer, and I agree with everything he said. And as that, metropolitan planning organization, they have visibility into a lot of other things that are related to transportation, but not directly related to the transportation infrastructure. And so helping, state DOTs and our congressional delegations and our state legislatures and even local elected officials understand the importance of these investments, how those investments could be used, leveraged against other infrastructure investments within these technology spaces by hospital districts, public education communities, others would be critical, and to define the need. And as we know, all politics is local. So as those MPOs can shape the need, the understanding of the value of these solutions, how they will improve the safety, reliability, and mobility of their transportation system, and get that out to the public at large, is a great way for them to help elevate the importance of this in the public domain, and therefore drive greater investments in this, and to help state DOTs and others prioritize these solutions as part of the services that they're providing. So I would just at a very high level say MPOs would be critically important to be part of this conversation. And it really fits into I think another question around, how can planners really help us understand the data that they need? And I would just say that it's about creating that ecosystem of conversation. I think Bob and his team are doing a great job in Colorado of really convening the ecosystem of players to help understand what they need. We had a conversation prior to this call about the fact that there is so much data available. It's really how do we start to visualize that data, harvest that data, and turn it into useful information. And I think a lot of times technology providers and innovators sort of create a solution and go in search of a problem. And if we can get planners involved in the process to help us define what they really need and want, then we're very likely going to be able to harvest that data from the desperate sources that we have, whether it's from crowdsourcing or direct sensor arrays, and be able to provide that data but there also has to be an articulation or understanding of what that data's use might be and how it would be beneficial to collect and provide that information. So
yeah, I'd like to add to that as well. That question around the planners, instead of trying to solve that question, I'd like what we're doing at our chief data office. I see she's on, so I'm probably being graded right now, so she's watching, Barb. But I will just give her a shout out, because what we're trying to do here is an advanced data analytics platform. It's a predictive analytics platform, as well as a data lake. So not only getting the sensor array and all our sensor data, every kind of data that we collect, as well as third-party data, into one data lake. What that would do is be able to, you don't know what you don't know, right? So if we can put all that data in one place and people can pick the different data sources so they can answer their own questions, would be more beneficial. At the end of the day, the planners shouldn't try to translate to the technologists or the techie folks what they're trying to do necessarily. They might want to say, well, this would be an interesting data source, and we would try to figure out what data how can we source that data and get it into the data lake for you to do whatever use case scenario planning or predictive analytics or predictive actions that we're trying to take. We're trying to get to the point, hopefully one day, is we can predict the likelihood of an incident and where it would be on the highway, to stage proper apparatuses to save lives. That would be an ideal state. I know, like Indiana, I think, has been doing that for a lot longer than a lot of other states, but we would like to take that and put it on steroids. And we always want to try to do a little bit better on the next round of an opportunity like that. So, I think that if the DOTs can turn around and really focus on anything that you do, and you're collecting data, it needs to be in one place, and make sure that everyone has access to the data. I think that would be the biggest thing I would recommend, so that planners can plan, traffic engineers can figure out their analysis and what's to improve the safety of the corridors, to even maintenance planning, when assets need to be replaced or updated. If that's all in one place, you can take variations of all sorts of data sources, even in maintenance, like how much, if I was collecting sensor data around friction and snowfall rates and temperatures, take that with volume and speeds, and look at the type of material we put down on the ground and what asphalt we're using, you could actually predict when that road needs to be replaced, or what treatments can be applied. Just having the plethora of that data in one place so that you can make a sound decision on your assets as a DOT is critical. So I one day we'll be there. We're on that journey right now, and I'm excited to be part of that conversation here at CDOT.
And that leads to getting towards our final question. There was a question about whether this is being recorded, and yes, it is going to be recorded and available on the ITSA website. But I want to really hit on this, and maybe this can be your final parting shots. The thing you talked about, Bob, is making sure everyone has equal access to the applications and the data, right? So that goes back to connectivity. And John, you mentioned different DOTs are at different points, right? Some are looking at, hey, I'm going to deploy bare metal boxes, white boxes, and do all my network functions via software. Others are, I got legacy networking technology and I just got to take baby steps, right? So, what are some three basic steps people could take in either of those ends of that spectrum to modernize their network to make sure that it is able to ensure connectivity to those applications and data?
Is that for John or me? It doesn't matter.
Either one of it. Yeah.
I really think, one, got to have a plan. Always start with a plan. You need to look for what is your outcome, right? What is your desired outcome, and have that documented. And how did you measure it? What's a measure of success? What shows that you got the outcome and your plan was developed? I think you really need to have a clear path, because as I've said with my team many times, you can start squirreling out, going all over the yard, going all over the place, and you're going to blow money and achieve nothing. And honestly, if you're a leader within a DOT, I would encourage your technology folks to take that plan, outcome, and measurements and really keep it at a very easy conversational piece discussion. And I always refer to that as ducks and bunnies. Let's keep it very simple. Let's keep it very clear and concise. and make sure we follow the plan, because these plans can take years to execute, and it's very easy to, and I catch myself at this, to start deviating a little bit, and guess what? We never get to the outcome, and then did we really hit success? So that's what would be my advice.
Okay, John, how about you? Key advice in terms of taking steps to modernize your network.
Yeah, I think they would be very, very similar. Is to understand, create a vision of what you're trying to accomplish as state DOT in terms of utilizing and deploying these technologies. Develop a roadmap for the implementation of that vision, so you can understand the steps it will take to be successful in doing that. And part of that would be understanding the financial realities associated with it and the opportunities that you can take advantage of to help pay for these types of things, and then to execute on the plan that you've developed. So very, very similar. I would also say that it's critically important that we engage the broader community. So often I think that as engineers, we know what the challenge is and we solve the challenge. And I've been reminded many times throughout my career, and now as I work for so many DOTs across the country, that it's really important to define the challenge up front so we know what problem we're solving. And then as we create a vision to solve that, put together a roadmap on how to be successful in delivering on that vision, and a plan for executing towards that, we're solving the right problem. And this is a bit unique because a lot of the solutions that we're providing are not just for the operation of the system that we're responsible for, but it's providing services to the public. And it's a bit of a different paradigm than our DOTs have traditionally been. And again, having worked at the state DOT for most of my professional career, I love and admire and respect and thank all of our DOT personnel as public servants that are on this call today for everything that you do. But many of us were born out of an engineering genre and generation that were led by people that came back from World War II and started building assets to be able to move tanks around the country. So it's a different challenge that we're facing today than a lot of us were trained to execute on. And so it's really important that we involve all the right people in defining this. And it gets down to even basically what is mobility. And again, because Bob's on the call, I can tell you that Director Lou's definition of what Colorado's challenge and what problem they're trying to solve is much different than what Director Lewis had for them or Director Bat had for them just a few years ago. So the problems that we're trying to solve are changing, and we just need to make sure we have an inclusive conversation around what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and then solve that.
Yeah, and it sounds also like you need to factor in some flexibility to be able to meet the needs of today, but also knowing that things are going to change in the future.
Yeah, I think there's one quick question in there about, do we sell lease dark fiber? Yes, we do. We do lease to private and public entities, as well as we swap and barter for the use and access to our right of way with private entities. If you want more information, you're more than happy to email me. So I just want to quick answer that.
Very good. I think, Rachel, we're about out of time. I want to thank Bob and John for a lively discussion. It sounds like we had another hour. We could easily fill that up. We do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. We really thank the audience for your participation and your questions. And as John said, for your selfless service and ensuring that folks are able to move about the states. Rachel, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you to John, Bob, and Daniela for today's webinar. I want to thank our attendees, and we hope to see you at our next webinar coming up on Thursday. So thank you all for joining today.
Thanks, everybody.